Welcome to Conversations on the Future of Democracy, a series sponsored by the John W. Kluge Center at the Library of Congress. I'm John Haskell, director of the Kluge Center. Today we are discussing with Dr. Martha Jones her recent book, Vanguard: How Black Women Broke Barriers, Won the Vote, and Insisted on Equality for All. Dr. Jones is the Society of Black Alumni Presidential Professor at the Johns Hopkins University. She's a legal and cultural historian whose work examines how Black Americans have shaped the story of American democracy. In 2018, she wrote Birthright Citizens: A History of Race and Rights in Antebellum America, and was winner of the Organization of American Historians Award for Best Book in Civil Rights History, the American Historical Association Prize for Best Book in American Legal History, and the American Society for Legal History Award for Best Book in Anglo-American Legal History. Martha, welcome.
Thank you very much for having me.
So for those of us, those of our viewers who don't know too much about you, tell us about who you are as a scholar.
That's a big question.
Gives you an open-ended way to answer.
Yeah, I'm somebody who came to scholarship and the writing of history relatively late in her career. I had a first life as a public interest lawyer in New York City. And one way for me to think about the arc of that journey is to appreciate the many ways in which we come to work on and commit ourselves to the work of not only historical thinking, but the bigger project of American democracy. And I think I did that as a lawyer. And though my days are very different, classrooms versus courtrooms, I think of my work as very much still in that spirit.
What inspired you to write Vanguard? As I understand it, the book has a personal element for you.
It does. Vanguard was written, on the one hand, to intervene, be a part of the celebrations and conversations that were going to be generated by the celebration of 100 years of the 19th Amendment, 100 years of women's suffrage in the United States. I wanted to be sure that Black American women were centrally a part of that conversation in 2020. But along the way, as you allude to, I took a sort of detour, one I never told my editor about until it was all over, but I became very curious, more than curious. I became preoccupied with a question about the women in my own family and how they fit into this story. And it turns out they had a lot to teach me. I found my great-grandmother in St. Louis, Missouri in 1920, a member of an African-American women's YWCA, where she helped to organize a suffrage school, helping Black women to overcome the Jim Crow barriers that might have otherwise kept them away from the polls in 1920. And later on, I find my own grandmother now in the modern civil rights era in the 50s and 60s, part of the grassroots efforts of that generation to press for African-American voting rights. And it's really a lesson in what happens when you center Black women in this story. You can't end in 1920 at all. You have to come all the way up through, for example, the passage of the Voting Rights Act in 1965.
Where was your grandmother in the 50s and 60s, and what did she do?
She lived in a central North Carolina city, Greensboro, a city that I think some folks will remember from the role that students there played in the sit-in movement during the modern civil rights era. She came to Greensboro in the 1920s with my grandfather, who was president of a historically Black college in Greensboro, Bennett College,
Right.
which is still there today.
Mm-hmm.
So by the 50s and 60s, my grandmother is supporting now a young generation of Bennett students, young Black women who are taking to the streets and to the Black communities in Greensboro to get residents there registered and to the polls. Yeah,
and of course it got a lot of attention. Jesse Jackson was involved at some level. What did the celebration, you referred to the celebration, the centennial celebration of the passage of the 19th Amendment. What did that mean to you, both as a legal and cultural historian, but also as a person, as an African-American person?
I'm somebody who, after researching this book, really realized I couldn't quite celebrate the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment. I recognize that it was a milestone in the long story of American voting rights. But as my research and the research of many others has demonstrated, too many African American women remain disenfranchised after the 19th Amendment is ratified. That disenfranchisement is not accidental, not unanticipated, but it is, in a sense, part of the design of the 19th Amendment. The possibility of ratification of that amendment rested upon the unmitigated extension of Jim Crow strictures like poll taxes and literacy tests, now that had long kept Black men from the polls, now are going to keep Black women from the polls. That's not, for me, a historical milestone in the celebration sense, but it is an important story in the longer road that African Americans travel to get to voting rights.
I mean, just to be clear, it wasn't the case that the passage of an amendment made any difference then if a literacy test was going to deny somebody the vote, or some other means, like you said, a poll tax, and principally in the southern states, but other places too.
And when we dive into the archival record, that's not a secret, right? That is an open facet of the debates, of the consideration and more that get us to ratification of the amendment.
When you look at your book, what you see are a lot of untold stories, but perhaps in the category of the least told of the untold stories were the work of Black women at the vanguard of the effort to achieve suffrage all the way back into the 1800s. Could you speak to a couple of those stories?
This is a book that kept pulling me farther and farther into the past. And the reason was that I really wanted to understand, yes, Black women's activism, but I also wanted to understand their thinking. I wanted to understand how Black women had developed a political philosophy, a vision of American democracy that rejected both racism and sexism in their lives, but really for all Americans. And when I began to pull on that thread, as you say, I find myself in the first decades of the 19th century, in the 1820s and 30s, where some remarkable women like Jarena Lee, a preacher in the African Methodist Episcopal Church, maybe not the place you'd expect a book about women's votes to begin, but indeed Lee is one of the architects, the early architects of a political philosophy that African American women carry with them and work through and at least hold up for the nation to emulate. So these are not women who yet have the opportunity to intervene in party politics or run for office or can imagine yet casting ballots. But Jarena Lee, like someone like Maria Miller Stewart, who is the first American woman, as best we know, of any color, to speak about politics from a podium, which she does in Boston in the 1830s. Stewart is somebody else who speaks in what today we would call intersectional terms about the twin scourge of racism and sexism. And after a very brief and fiery career at the podium, finds herself, in essence, run out of Boston for her political heresy.
And as you move in time, with the abolition movement, as in the abolition of slavery, there was a real tension, wasn't there, between the effort to free slaves and thinking about women's suffrage? I mean, some abolitionists were in favor of women's suffrage, right?
Absolutely. One of the origins for women's rights and ultimately the movement for women's votes is in that critique that is already being leveled at slavery. Racism, like sexism, man-made differences that are arbitrary and should not be countenanced. That critique is American women can see themselves in the critique of slavery. And African American women indeed can see themselves in that critique alongside white women. And for a brief time in the 1830s, they are really partners in now challenging the kinds of political strictures that would leave women to the margins of anti-slavery politics.
What about Ida B. Wells? She's, I guess, probably the best known African-American woman who was associated with the 19th Amendment.
Yeah.
What's your story on her?
Yeah. Wells is, there have been many wonderful biographies of Wells. And so fortunately, I didn't have to give her as much space in a sense as she deserves, as you say. But Wells is, a child of enslavement, a native of Tennessee, a journalist run out of Memphis when she challenges with her unparalleled and fiery pen the scourge of lynching in the late 19th century. She'll relocate to Chicago, where she will continue to be an international spokesperson, an advocate of anti-lynching legislation, but will, as you suggest, add women's political power and women's suffrage to her agenda. Wells will found suffrage associations, important ones in the city of Chicago. And here we have to remember that women in Illinois are going to win the vote in 1913, even before the 19th Amendment has been ratified. And so Wells is deeply entrenched in women's politics, Republican Party politics by the early 20th century. And she's someone who is going to importantly challenge, reject, and work against the anti-Black racism that too often is in the early 20th century contaminating the suffrage movement. Wells is really someone who stands up to that.
You spent some time in the book talking about how suffrage was, I'm going to be careful about my language, maybe simpler may not be quite the right word, but the achievement of some level of political equality was a fairly direct line for white women, whereas you get the right to vote and you're further along, a lot further along than Black women would be, and maybe that's still the case. Develop that point for us, because you speak to that in the book.
Black women, for a long time, historians have puzzled over why African American women weren't more present in the major suffrage associations, particularly in those years leading up to the 19th Amendment. And the mistaken assumption was that Black women weren't concerned with those issues. So part of the strategy in this book was, rather than look for Black women where they should be, I tried to find them where they actually were. And one example of that is the founding in 1896 of the National Association of Colored Women's Clubs. And here, Black women choose not to invest heavily in the National Suffrage Associations and create an organization in which they can do the important work of anti-racism, including the struggle for anti-lynching legislation, at the same time that they can engage in women's politics, i.e. the struggle for the vote. So for Black women, it's important both philosophically but organizationally to build spaces in which they can work on these two parallel scourges simultaneously. Why? Because as the story of the 19th Amendment reveals to us, that even a federal amendment that looks to support and even guarantee women's votes can be quite easily, unfortunately, abrogated in the early 20th century by state laws that aim themselves at Black Americans, animated by anti-Black racism. So Black women understand that there is no out for them in a politics that is simply women's politics or a politics that is simply anti-racism politics. They really need to create the spaces, the organizations, and the ideas that permit them to work on both issues simultaneously.
Yeah, because we had lynching, I mean, the larger picture of Jim Crow, which weren't issues of direct relevance to the lives of white women in the same way, certainly. I'm particularly fascinated by Fannie Lou Hamer's role. And I was wondering how you think of her going down in history. Tell us a little bit about her first, but also how you think she goes down in history.
So Fannie Lou, now we're in the modern civil rights era.
Right.
Fannie Lou Hamer, a native of Mississippi, one-time sharecropper turned voting rights organizer, working through the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, or SNCC. Mrs. Hamer is on the very, very rough, the dangerous front lines of voting rights in the state of Mississippi, and pays an extraordinary personal price, both with her health and well-being, as well as her livelihood, for championing the voting rights of Black Mississippians. But she's someone, importantly in my story, who understands the power of the image, the camera, particularly the moving camera, in its capacity, television, right, to bring African-American struggles over voting rights into the homes of many Americans, millions of them, far from the state of Mississippi. So she is a master at this technology. And she also is an extraordinary strategist. And so Hamer will help to found the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party, which in 1964 will head to the Democratic National Convention that summer. Lyndon Johnson is about to be nominated as the Democrats' candidate, but Hamer is there to decry the party for having seated a Mississippi delegation made simply of white Mississippians who have not been vetted and certainly not approved by African Americans in that state. And I urge folks on your YouTube or wherever you get your videos to look at the 8+ minutes of Mrs. Hamer's testimony before the Credentials Committee at the Democratic Convention in 1964 to understand her skill, her craft, but her message, right, which is that there will be no peace for the Democratic Party. There will be no peace for Lyndon Johnson's campaign if voting rights for Black Americans does not surface as a unavoidable and absolutely necessary facet of the platform. And this is how Hamer holds the feet of the party, holds the feet of Lyndon Johnson to the fire of African-American voting rights. And as we know, by the spring of 1965, the Voting Rights Act will be signed into law.
And many historians and political scientists in retrospect see this, and Fannie Lou Hamer was at the forefront of it, as seeing that as a turning point in our parties. I mean, the Democratic and Republican parties stemming from that point, not coincidentally involving Fannie Lou Hamer and the race question in Mississippi, have gone different directions. I don't know if you're one of those historians that thinks of it that way, but that's how consequential I think watching those 8 minutes can be for somebody who wasn't, for example, born by that point.
Absolutely. And I think that the other thing that's important and instructive, I think, about Mrs. Hamer's work is that she is an organizer and she's prepared to play party politics, right? She is someone working at the grassroots who also knows how to show up at a major political convention and command the attention of the nation, not only of the convention. And so it is this versatility, I think, that is also profoundly instructive. And we don't have to look far in our own past to recognize that kind of political versatility that she really helped to author continues to be a signature dimension of Black women's politics even today.
And it's an African-American dominated party in Mississippi now. And it wouldn't have been it had not been for people like her, particularly her leadership, I think.
Yes.
Well, what other stories? I mean, I've raised a few people specifically. What other stories would you like for people to know about from your book?
Well, there's one figure I've been thinking a lot about, and this is Mary McLeod Bethune from Florida. Bethune is born during Reconstruction, 1875. By the dawn of the 20th century, she's an educator founding a girls' school in Daytona, Florida. She's a suffragist who's going to work tirelessly to get Black women registered into the polls in 1920 in the state of Florida. She's going to do that in the face of extraordinary, unspeakable Klan violence in the state of Florida. Mrs. Bethune will go on to help Franklin Roosevelt organize in the 1930s his Black cabinet. Here she learns to do an end run around disenfranchisement in Florida and many places across the country, and uses patronage to bring Black Americans into the federal government to help steer resources to Black communities during the Depression. Her career will be long enough that in 1945, she'll be at the founding in San Francisco of the United Nations, part of a African-American delegation where she'll link arms with women of color from across the globe, for whom her struggles against Jim Crow really resonate with their own struggles against apartheid, against colonialism, and more. It's an extraordinary career, but she's really on my mind these days because rightly so, a lot of us have spent time contemplating the Capitol, and by that I mean the capital O Capitol, the U.S. Capitol. And Mrs. Bethune is about to be installed in the National Statuary Collection, replacing a long-standing statue that represented the state of Florida, the figure of a Confederate general. Now Mrs. Bethune, this educator, suffragist, political operative, international figure of consequence, will be someone that we all will encounter when we next have the opportunity to visit the Capitol. It seems like a very apt place for her to wind up for someone who has told a story like hers in Vanguard.
More recently, you have an article earlier this month in the Washington Post about the reception your book and discussing your book received in Louisiana. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yes. The Louisiana Endowment for the Humanities this past year funded a series of book readings, conversations in local public libraries on the theme of voting rights. And among the books selected was indeed my book, Vanguard. A school board in Lafayette, Louisiana, when presented with the opportunity to host one of these programs, a program that would include a discussion of Vanguard, decided to decline and not to host the event. And their concern, I'm going to say their concern, as they expressed it, was that the two sides of the story of voting rights were not being represented. And I've thought a lot about that two sides must be represented position. And, you know, on the one hand, I thought, I don't think they've actually read my book, because there is a great deal of, if you will, the other side, which is to say you can't tell the story of African-American women in voting rights without introducing those organizations, characters, and historical moments in which their voting rights are very much opposed, very much suppressed, very much denied. I just referred to Mrs. Bethune, for example, who faced the Ku Klux Klan. So I do think, in fact, my book does a sort of justice to the other side. But as I understand it, the board didn't see it that way. And so the happy ending to the story, if there is one, is that the local university, the University of Louisiana at Lafayette, is going to host the event.
So after making the kind of impact you've had with with what we've just talked about, which isn't necessarily positive in all respects, although the ending's good, I guess. What are you working on next? How are you looking to, as an historian who really writes for a much broader public than just academics, what are you looking to do next?
Yeah. You know, I think one of the defining characteristics of my work is to tell chapters of American history, some of them familiar, some of them less familiar, but tell those chapters standing in the shoes of Black Americans. So I'm at work now on the early stages of a biography of a somewhat notorious figure in U.S. history, U.S. Supreme Court Justice Roger Brooke Taney. Justice Taney had a long career that stretched from the end of the 18th century all the way through to the Civil War. He's best known, most notorious, I think, for his decision in 1857 in the Dred Scott case, in which Justice Taney concluded that no Black American could be a citizen of the United States. Taney is a controversial figure, an enduring figure, someone who whose ideas, I think, we haven't fully appreciated from the perspective of the Black Americans who were his peers, who were his associates, who were in some cases his servants, and even those held enslaved by him. So I'm looking forward to retelling the life of Roger Brooke Taney from that vantage point.
That's all the time we have, Martha. We thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you back at the library soon.
Thanks very much.